Yeah, this is, as I was saying, this is his first work of non-fiction that we have chosen, and it's not an easy read. It certainly doesn't read as smoothly as his many Hornblower books, which he had already written before he tackled the Naval War of 1812. It doesn't have an index, it doesn't have a list of sources. Um, but nevertheless, the battle scenes are gripping, and I particularly like the almost 3 day stern chase of the USS Constitution, Old Ironside. I think that's a very exciting story and a remarkable tribute to the seamanship of those American sailors. Um, I don't understand why. He was obviously a naval historian, knew a great deal of history, and yet he seemed to prefer creative non-fiction popular novels than writing serious books on history. The only other one is his splendid biography of Nelson, which he wrote much earlier, which presumably some of you will have read. It's a very good, easy read, easier than the Naval War of 1812. Um, Finally, the War of 1812, as we know, was very sad, tragic, and unnecessary war. And as Hornblower's biographer said, Northcote Parkinson, it was a war a conflict which began over nothing, proved nothing, and settled nothing. And it cost over 23,000 lives and the burning of two capitals in Washington, in Toronto. But on the other side, there were many profiteers and privateers who made great fortunes. The, um, the privateers, the American privateers, took 1,607 British merchant ships. And they ended up very, very wealthy. I'd like to turn over now to Ron to run this webinar, but I would just actually mention that he has walked the decks of Old Ironside, the USS Constitution. And incidentally, I have walked the planks of the USS Chesapeake, because USS Chesapeake, which was Shannon's great victory, all in the book, was taken over to the UK and broken up. And in the little market town just over the hill from here is Wickham. They have the Chesapeake Mill. You probably won't be able to see this. There. And that is built on the planks and the timbers recovered from the USS Chesapeake. And at that point, I'd like to hand over to Ron to take charge of us. Over to you, Ron.
Thank you very much, John. So just a few ground rules here. We would ask if you would mute yourself when not speaking, so we get a minimum of background noise. And conversely, remember to unmute yourself when you are speaking. If you wish to speak, if you would attempt to employ the raised hand symbol so I can call on you, and if that's too obscure, try something much more primitive and actually raise your hand. I will do my best to include everyone who wants to speak. This is not intended as a lecture. We hope this will be interactive, and that everyone can have an opportunity to speak on areas of interest. I'd like to start out by expanding on what John said in his opening remarks. There's not much nonfiction by Forrester, and certainly very little nonfiction in his mature career. The biographies that he wrote, including that Napoleon biography, that Nelson biography, were written quite early on, I believe mostly in the 1920s. John was more complimentary about the Nelson biography than I would be. I think that he was C.S. Forester was looking to earn a living by writing in those days. He hadn't really hit his stride, knowing what he did best. He wrote biographies of Napoleon and Josephine and Nelson, and they're a bit dry, I think, which is a surprise for those of us who are familiar with his later writing style. He also wrote uh, essentially a children's history of the Barbary pirates. He edited a diary of a British sailor, John Wetherell, and his other mature nonfiction work, which has gotten more recognition, was about the sinking of the Bismarck, which has been published under various titles. The Last 9 Days of the Bismarck was the basis for a movie. That's a fairly gripping book, and a more mature writing style, I think. So what I wanted to ask of people is is how do you find his nonfiction writing style in these more mature in this much more mature book compares to his nonfiction style, uh, to his fiction style, which he was employing at the very same time. This book came out about the time of Admiral Hornblower, or Hornblower in the West Indies, which is a very different writing style. And what do you think distinguishes one from the other? Any comments from this group? Many of whom I think have probably read both. Is there anyone who'd like to raise a hand, literally or figuratively, on that topic?
Ron,
Yes.
it's John here. Can you see me? I can't see myself yet.
No, we know what you look like, John. So
I'm on screen, am I?
you have the benefit. We can see your. Yes, we can.
Okay.
John Maunder
I
from
struggle to
England
see
is.
myself. The point I want to make, I think, is with his non-fiction books, he pays you the compliment of assuming that you know the story before he tells you it. Again, unlike non-fiction where everything is new. I had the same feeling reading this book as I did when I read the Nelson book. I would have loved a timeline and a chapter chapter headings all the way through. It's just you're coming to it. I saw it was the first time, and yeah, it was just hard going. Where with his fiction, you just let him take you there.
I think that's very well said. Before I give my own view, anyone else like to talk about a comparison between his fiction and his nonfiction styles? Yes, Mary, thank you.
Um, I had a sort of a similar experience, John. I'm not familiar with the history, and to me, it seemed almost like a number of short stories. There you are talking about Admiral Hornblower, right? Which is a number of short stories kind of stitched together, and that was kind of my experience with this book as well. Short stories stitched together.
Um,
And I know there's a continuous story there, but it didn't feel like it.
yeah, sure. So he talks about privateers, he talks about various characters, although there's I think a limited amount of characterization in the book. One of the strongest things of his fiction, which we like so much, is the characters, and we come to love the various characterizations of Lieutenant Bush, and to a lesser degree Lieutenant Girard, and Barbara and Maria, and there's really not much of that in this book, and I think that if I was going to ask later on, but it's appropriate now. What could have made this book better? And John talks about chapter headings, timeline. I think the biggest lack in this book is maps. uh, how much more helpful it would have been to see maps, or I guess more properly charts, as I was taught in officer indoctrination school, maps of land, charts of water. Um, and I recalled my great pleasure when I discovered many, many years ago the Hornblower Companion, with the maps that made great sense of the narrative in the books. And I would have loved to see, for example, something comparable to the wonderful map of the battle between the Lydia and the Natividad, which is, I think, described in a way that is similar to the Constitution and Guerriere battle, but hard to keep track of the maneuverings. I would say lack of maps, lack of real characterization of individuals in the nonfiction work. But who's the hero? If there's a hero in this book, who's the hero? Who about whom does Forrester say nothing bad, nothing derogatory? Who is that? Not a sailor at all. The Duke of Wellington.
Mm.
Duke of Wellington is always right. The Duke of Wellington is not only a wonderful general, the Duke of Wellington understands naval theory. The Duke of Wellington gives advice, which is not always followed and should have been. Um,
He was Hornblow's brother-in-law, don't forget.
uh, yes. Although his own brother, the Marquis Wellesley, Richard, is not so favorably portrayed in Commodore, I guess it is. But the Iron Duke is infallible. And yes, Mary.
I love he exactly. I mean, if you wanted someone who seems to do very well in the story in the war, of course, there's Hull, who only serves for a very short time in the war directly. But yeah, the Duke of Wellington is sprinkled throughout. Almost every other chapter has got something from him where he had some foresight or some wisdom or would have changed the outcome. Yeah, he's a great addition to a war that he never actually directly participated
Exactly.
in.
Exactly. And conversely, yes, John Roberts.
Yeah, he'd already done the Naval War of 1812 with his, which actually has brilliant characterization, and you really get to know the captain from Connecticut in that book, which covers the same ground, well, part of the same ground. And anybody who hasn't read that really ought to, having read the Naval War of 1812, they would enjoy reading that book, Captain from Connecticut.
That's a wonderful observation, John. That's fiction, for those of you who don't know it. It's a book that it seems to me it was almost written at two different times. The first half of the book is among his best fiction writing. It's wonderful. The characters are good, the situations are good. And then the second half is a big letdown. And you wonder what was going on in his life and what else he was doing, what else he was writing that led to such a change. It actually reminded me, in kind of a naval sense, of Mark Twain's Life on the Mississippi. Where he wrote the first half and the second half many years apart, and they are of very unequal interest. But the Captain from Connecticut, if only for the first half, is well worth reading. Um, so, as I was saying, conversely, if Wellington is spoken of favorably at almost every mention, who is spoken of unfavorably at almost every mention? Across the sea, James Madison. James Madison comes off very badly in this book, perhaps probably deservedly so. Um, but can't do anything right, doesn't know why he got into the war in the first place, doesn't do a very good job of managing it, doesn't accomplish anything when it's settled. And it's not a sympathetic figure at all, which raises the question for me, does Forrester take sides in this war? From what he writes, from the characterization of Wellington and Madison alone, um, he certainly seems Anglophilic. But does he really take sides as to who was right and who was wrong, or it more as John said in the outset, a war that was about nothing and accomplished nothing. Um, does he
That's
does he
sorry.
is he more sympathetic to one side than the other, do you think? Anyone? John.
Yeah, that's a great point. The big American historian who wrote books like United States of America, the history there, says that the fault, the blame, was all the English, the British. They were stupid and silly, and not the Americans. But I think that the point that C.S. Forrester makes is that the only people to emerge with any glory was the fledgling American Navy, which distinguished itself greatly against a vastly superior Navy.
And how could that be with not much of a naval tradition, a very poor naval showing in the American Revolution, um, and other than John Paul Jones, who we revere, um, how did it come about that the American Navy could um, handle itself so extremely well? Is it because of um, rigid thinking on the part of the British, who had had great success in naval wars up to that time? Was it partly shipbuilding? Those who built American frigates, which were essentially ships of the line? Was it Native American skill and crafty operations? Sort of comparable to the image that we have here of the British in the Revolution wearing their bright red colors so they could stand out and be shot dead whenever they marched through the woods, and not being able to adapt themselves to new circumstances. Uh, what was it, or wasn't it? What was
Yeah.
the? Do we here in the
Ron,
U.S. overstate our accomplishments? Uh, John Wander, is that
yeah,
you?
yeah. One thing C.S. Forrester did mention was that at that time, 1812 onwards, UK, Britain was running out of seamen. Had such a vast navy, everything was spread around. They couldn't get in the good recruits, as it were, compared with the US, which was in proportion to population had far more people, men, who could serve. And there's a reference in the book to when an American is on a ship, a British ship, and he doesn't see anyone smiling. You know, the morale was bad. That's a factor.
Uh-huh. And certainly the tide turned, to use an inapt nautical metaphor, the when um, the British were more available after the defeat of Napoleon, and were able to turn their resources against America, and that's a part of the war that we don't talk about that much here in the New World. So yes, Chris.
Yeah. So what we learn about any organized endeavor like this, particularly military endeavors, is that it's all about leadership. And in my view, the key reason that America was initially so successful in the War of 1812 at sea was because the British captains and the admirals were used to winning, and they couldn't understand the new dynamic that was going on with the new lusty nation willing to impose itself at sea. So there were all the other factors about the seamen, particularly about the ships, but the key one, in my view, is that the leadership of the Royal Navy just wasn't ready to face somebody who was equal or better than they were, and it took them the first year to realise that, and after that it turned. But in that first year, they just weren't ready for it, in my view.
Do you think, Chris, that they were unprepared for the single ship battles
Yeah.
as opposed to fleet actions?
So particularly the single ship actions, because they were so used to winning those, I'm not sure what the statistics are, but certainly in the years preceding that, it had all gone Britain's way, and they just weren't ready for a high morale organisation with good leadership to be their new foe. I think that was the key problem to me.
Do you think that it was a particularly pleasing to Forrester to be able to depict a battle between a theoretically smaller, less powerful ship, a frigate, against a ship of the line, because he wrote so dramatically about the Lydia as a I guess Lydia was a frigate. What was the Lydia? James Ashton, what was the Lydia?
Frigate.
Yes,
A
a
frigate.
frigate, yes.
Yeah.
Frigate against more or less a ship of the line in the Natividad, although handled very badly. So I wonder if it gave him great pleasure to recount in a nonfiction work that encounter, which he had already written about in such detail in The Happy Return. I wonder
I
if
think
it was a factor in his writing.
I think you must have enjoyed that because
Yes.
Certainly it makes for a more compelling read if the two sides aren't equal,
Yes,
particularly if the underdog can win,
exactly right.
which is not always the case.
So I was quite impressed in reading this book at the extreme breadth of knowledge that Forrester has, and that he brought to the book, not only in ship handling, but in the understanding of privateering, the understanding of the political situation, and of course, we expect him to understand the context of the Napoleonic Wars because he's written so much about that. But his knowledge goes so far beyond that that he's able to make all of these analogies to battles in other eras in World War II, in the American Civil War, um, and um, uh, particularly to engage in these counterfactual arguments. What would have happened if this went on? And it reminds you of there's a short story in Gold from Crete, which is that I think posthumous collection of short stories. If Hitler had invaded England, and he delights in these counterfactual stories. Is Adrian? I don't see Adrian, but was Adrian's hand up? Yes,
Yes.
I see a message. Adrian, welcome.
Well, I just wanted to say that I thought Forrester did a terrific amount of research. He must have spent a long time in the archives of the Royal Navy looking up the various details, and also I don't know what sort of archives were in the USA, but he must have done a lot of research there. What I would also like to say that it led me to the Tripolitan Wars, which I knew nothing about, except one small thing, which, if you'll allow me a small diversion, in 2020, I went to the museum in Reggio di Calabria with the famous 7-foot or taller bronze statues which they found in the Straits of Messina. And it was, I don't know whether it's still there, a lovely little museum, which was surrounded by a bowl. It was in a bowl, and I went outside and set into the bowl were a number of plaques. USN Navy, USN frigate, such and such, Lieutenant such and such. And they were memorials to US Navy captains, lieutenants, which I knew nothing about. Luckily, there was an American in the party. And I asked him, and he said, "Oh yes, that was the Barbary War, or the Second Barbary War. It was after the Royal Navy in 1812 or so withdrew the protection for American merchantmen in the Mediterranean. And so the United States Navy had to send ships there to protect them." I hope it's a bit off the beam, but I thought it might interest you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, you know, he wrote that, I guess it's described as a juvenile history of the Barbary pirates, which was published in a series of American young history books called Landmark books. Um, I don't. I read it many years ago. I don't know if anyone has read it or recalled it, and I don't think it's at all on level with the skilled historical writing that he does here. John, yes. Uh, John Maunder, did you have a comment? You're lit up there for a moment.
No, I was listening.
Okay.
No.
Well, you talked about the research. Now, in 1957, or earlier years when he would have been researching this book, I think he was already living in California.
Yes.
So in those pre-internet days, you wonder how much access he had to archives, but this certainly betrays a great deal of research. Quite remarkable in a novelist. That's one of the things that we like about it so much. I also thought that there's an extremely touching incident in this book. The escort of the 8 Royal Navy captains as pallbearers of at the funeral was it of the captain of the Chesapeake, who was buried in that fashion? Really, a very, very touching incident, not always found in nonfiction. Was there anything else that particularly appealed to those of you who read this book, that made it special? No one has any special. I have another, letting in someone else from the waiting room, a late arrival.
Ron, it's
Yes,
Jeff.
Jeff.
I
Yeah.
used the manual hand.
Thank you. And a handsome one it is.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to come back, and it's actually both answering your question about what was special and also coming back on your comment, in fact, more your quote, that the War of 1812 accomplished nothing. So I can imagine from if you like, the primary combatant standpoint, the US and British, that's the case. But as a Canadian, it actually really was our coming of age, perhaps more on the land side of things, although I'm sure there were, quote, Canadian seamen on the British ships as well. But although the war is likely largely forgotten in the UK and in the US, it's really very important to us as Canadians. As I say, it's our coming of age. It's sort of the start of our history, and it actually led to the shift of our capital from York, Toronto, to Ottawa. I think it was realized that Toronto and anywhere really on the Great Lakes was just too vulnerable to the US. So it certainly has repercussions today. And in fact, it's still referenced today in some of the contemporary threats to our sovereignty.
Well, I was actually going to ask you if you would draw any lessons from that, that those, shall we say, who may be regarded historically in the same manner that Forrester regarded James Madison, as how they ought to learn from history as to not repeat it.
Thank you. I absolutely agree. I would also add that Mary and I ride our bikes by the site of the burned Canadian Parliament buildings. It's very close to where we live. They were somewhat humble at the time, but that certainly, as you well know, Ron, and as all Americans know, created a reaction, and the subsequent burning of the White House and the U.S. Constitution buildings.
Right. Chris, had you had a comment?
Yeah, just on that as well, and thanks for the comment on Canada. But I'm not American, as you can probably tell, although I've lived a few years in America. But in my view, the War of 1812 established America as a serious player on the international stage. It may not have achieved any of either the stated or non-stated objectives of Madison, but I think what it did do was put down a marker that America wasn't going to be pushed around. And I think in the in sort of grand strategic terms, that is most important for America and for the development of this new country. And I think that's often overlooked when people discuss the War of 1812. If the War of 1812 hadn't happened, probably Britain would still have taken a high-handed attitude towards America on the high seas and towards Americans' endeavors abroad. So I think it was very important to America, but then I'm not American, so.
Where are you calling in from, Chris?
I'm in the south of England. In fact, I must be very close to John Roberts, because he spoke about being near Wickham and the Chesapeake Mill. I'm about 20 minutes drive from there.
Ah, nice. Well, one thing that I think is missing from the historical aspect of the book, pardon me, is that a major factor in American the decision to go to war was a group of expansionist congressmen who, led by a young Henry Clay, who were known at the time as the War Hawks, who were interested in expanding American influence at the expense of Great Britain, and were not so much interested in naval rights, and indeed much of New England was opposed to the war. Those you would think would have the greatest maritime interest. There was a group which met in Hartford, Connecticut, called the Hartford Convention in 1814, in opposition to the war, and actually talked about secession from the United States. And I find nothing at all referring to that in the book. Now, he's not writing American history, he's writing maritime history and international relations. Pardon me, getting to sound like RFK Jr. But that wasn't of interest to him, which leads me to a statement that Forrest's other biographer, Sanford Sternlicht, made, that this book allowed Forrester to do what he does best. And I'm not sure I entirely agree with that. And I wonder what the reaction of this group is. And let me just kick it off by saying, reverting to something I said earlier, one of the things that I think we love the fiction for is the characterization. And there's not much of that in this book. So how does this book allow him to do what he does best? What is it that he does extremely well in his other writing that he does do in this book? Class, anyone?
No.
Yeah.
Brian, are you adjusting your volume or are you raising your hand?
I'm raising my hand.
Excellent.
Well, the one thing that Forrester can display in this book is his in-depth knowledge of the history of the war and seamanship, and the fact that he did it through research rather than experience. He can illustrate the facts that he does know so much about what it was like. Now, something that was said earlier, the difference between fact and fiction. You read fiction to entertain yourself. You read non-fiction to educate yourself. And you don't necessarily look for a flow through a non-fiction book, but you're picking up facts every page you turn. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. May I ask, is there a slight Scottish burr in your voice, Brian?
No.
Good Lord, no.
Oh heavens, I apologize.
Right. Oh, sure. The whole of Wales is attempting to take over America at this very moment. Welsh through and through, I'm afraid.
All right. Well, 1965, touring the Rhondda Valley with the university band was my experience in Wales, and I'd love to get back there.
I worked in the Rhondda Valley for the last 20 years of my working life.
Ah,
A wonderful place to come
yeah.
from, not necessarily a wonderful place to be at the moment.
I understand. James, did you have a comment?
My comment was going to be that clearly, I mean, Forrester was torn between his nationality and I think the audience that made him the most money, and his adopted home of the US, and it also shows up in one of the early Hornblower short stories, Hornblower and His Majesty, and there are quite a few remarks in there that are very sympathetic to the US Navy and the US in general. Just towards the end, when Hornblower is defending the king against possible capture by the Americans, and some of the remarks he makes. So I think it's quite clear he's torn between the land of his birth. Oh well, I suppose the land of his birth is Egypt.
Egypt, yeah.
Anyway, but he was brought up in England, and yet he had sympathies on both sides. So yeah, your observation about the U.S. president versus Wellington, yeah, I hadn't noticed that, and yeah, that's an interesting observation.
Well, James references the short story, which I think is underappreciated. It really is a lovely story called Hornblower and His Majesty, which is not as easy to find, or it's much more easy these days. But when many of us were first introduced to Forrester, it was hard to find. Takes place shortly after Commodore, when he's on rehabilitating from his illness, and there's a scene where his the royal yacht. Yes, is it was it Britannia? What was it?
Princess Charlotte. Oh, is it Charlotte?
No.
I think it was Charlotte.
Augusta?
Augusta. Yes.
Excellent.
Johnny's right. Sorry.
Excellent. And he's in command of that. And there's a brief moment where it appears that while sailing with the king, they may be captured by an American ship, and Hornblower actually toys with the idea of how it might lead to better international relations if he allowed himself to be captured.
Can I just at this stage introduce a commercial break for the C.S. Forrester Society's AGM conference taking place in Plymouth at the end of September? There is a link with the War of 1812. 16 miles from the centre of Plymouth is Dartmoor Prison. This was built in the early 1800s to house French prisoners of war. But interestingly, I found out from the spring of 1813 to March 1815, there were 6,500 American sailors in prison there. Of these, 270 died there, and there is a memorial grave to them by the prison. So there is a link. Plymouth AGM, 16 miles away from where 6,500 American sailors were imprisoned during the war.
Hardly known in this country at all. That's very interesting, and I'm sure we'll have a look at it at our meeting. So that gives us the opportunity to mention to this group. The society has, for long before I became involved, perhaps is now verging on 2 decades worth of annual meetings at sites related to the Hornblower stories. We have met in Stockholm. We have met in Brittany. We have met in Barcelona, in the
Paris.
Cotswolds, in Portsmouth, in London. We had the most remarkable. If I can just tell a bit of a story about my introduction to the society. I went to the first meeting. My first meeting was in Stockholm, which was an absolutely wonderful meeting. And as part of the meeting, we discussed where we would meet the next time. And it was decided to meet in London. And one of the more experienced members says, well, we should do a reenactment of a scene from a Lord Hornblower in Westminster Abbey. And not knowing the skill, experience, and connections of those in the society, I foolishly said, fellas, this is it's a church. You can't just walk into a church and put on a play. And they said, oh, no, don't concern yourself. We know some people. So the following year, at the appointed time, we meet at the main entrance to Westminster Abbey, where we are greeted by a canon of the church who, so help me, is named Canon Ball. And Canon Ball conducts us on a tour of Westminster Abbey, where he points out to us every plaque, floor plate, relic, memorial that has the most tangential reference to the British Navy, including, for example, the memorial plaque for Sir Cloudesley Shovel, who is best known for driving his fleet onto the Scilly Islands at great cost and expense because he mistook his longitude, thereby, in fact, leading to the search for the method that led to Harrison's clocks in discovering longitude, determining longitude. Cannonball then brings us to what Forrester describes as perhaps the most beautiful room in all of England, which is the Henry VII Lady Chapel at the back of the nave in Westminster Abbey, the room where Knights of the Bath are installed. It's a magnificent room. The only drawback to the room is a melancholy floor plate, which at one time covered the bones of Oliver Cromwell, who was then disinterred and hanged after the Restoration. In any event, we do exactly what the folks in Stockholm said we would do. First of all, we have a reenactment of the scene from chapter 1 of Lord Hornblower. Absolutely mind-blowing to be in the place and reenacting. We then have a service from the Book of Common Prayer. If there was anything that would make someone with the slightest interest in Horatio Hornblower a devoted follower of the society, that was it. And the meetings since then have been equally of interest. And this year's meeting will take place in Plymouth, the original Plymouth, not Massachusetts. The Plymouth, England, from September 26th to the 28th. You are all cordially invited to attend. These are wonderful occasions, and the programs which John Roberts and John Maunder and others are now putting together. I don't mean to slight anybody else who's working on the program. Program is almost ready to be published, which will describe the events, the lectures, the presentations, the tours, the reenactments that take place at these meetings. And I think for some of us, it's an absolute highlight of the year. We will cordially invite all of you to come and do that. The information will be posted on the website very soon, beyond the bare bones that's there now. We are approaching the 1 hour mark. I don't think that we have skipped anything that ought to be addressed with regard to the book, but I will open the floor to general comments. Yes?
Ron?
Yes, please, John.
If anyone wants any more after this session, go online, look for BBC Sounds. There's a radio series called In Our Time, and on the 31st of January 2013, they broadcast a 42-minute program on the War of 1812. And it's a discussion between 3 academics, and it's a fascinating listen. One thing they brought out, for example, which didn't come out of any of the Hornblower books, was the effect of the American Indians of the War of 1812. But I do recommend, if you can get it, BBC Sounds, In Our Time, the War of 1812. 42 minutes of excellent conversation.
Jeff Rathbone was acknowledging his agreement with that, I think. Yes, Chris. You're muted.
There we go. Just unmuted myself. So I disappeared from the screen a minute ago because something occurred to me as we were talking about the nature of this book, and people were talking about the research going in and so on. I just dug out my Roosevelt's War of 1812, and I'm just showing you that because there's a very nice diagram of the action between, what's that one? That one's Java and Constitution, for example. So I don't think Forrester had very much research to do for this book because it's all in Roosevelt's book. Probably 95% of the research was already done. What Forrester has done very well has made it more readable than Roosevelt's book, which is, if you think Forrester's 1812 is a tough read, try Roosevelt's. And he did that without putting any diagrams in. So Roosevelt has put all those diagrams. Every action has got the traditional sort of where the wind's coming from, where the ships were, and so on, which he uses to illustrate it. And Forrester somehow manages to do that without those diagrams. So I think what he's doing, he's bringing his novelist skills into the historical sphere, and created this great, more readable version of the Naval War of 1812. It's even got exactly the same name as Roosevelt's book.
Yes.
So that's kind of my view about where the Naval War of 1812 comes from. It's a great, readable historical account. And actually, since then, many other people have copied that way of presenting history. And particularly if you read Nicholas Rogers' new trilogy, they're very much in that sort of narrative style of history. And he probably wasn't the first to do it, but he was certainly one of the first people to do it well. And that's what stands out to me about the book. There was something niggling in my mind as we were talking, and that was it. And I've just skimmed through Roosevelt's book and found that.
Thank you.
There you go. That's my contribution. Thank you.
Very, very helpful. I do agree that in a way, the highlight of the book is the single ship battle between the Constitution and the Guerriere, which is just a gripping description. And as you say, even without the map. That gave a great deal of pleasure. Any closing thoughts? Any final thoughts? John Roberts, anything you'd like to put on as a bookend from your original remarks? John, are you?
No, that's fine. That's fine. Thank you. I do have one question, which I suspect we won't get the answer to. Is he doesn't mention anywhere the superior oak, which apparently is grown in America, and we were taught a long time ago that it was much denser, and therefore the British, with their lighter guns, had difficulty penetrating the hulls of the American ships. And I don't think he mentions it anywhere in the Naval War of 1812, but somebody will correct me, I'm sure.
Yes.
Well, the origin of the nickname Old Ironsides is directly related to that. Although wasn't who was Edmund? You British historians, Edmund Ironside was from the
Civil War.
Yeah.
Lucky, did you have a comment? Yes, please. If you would unmute. Lucky is our longtime colleague and friend from Sri Lanka, who has threatened on several occasions to come to an annual meeting, but hasn't made it yet.
Yeah, I must first of all thank all of you as a non-paying member, friend of the society. I must thank all of you for your hospitality in accommodating me, even electronically. And I must thank all of you, especially John Roberts and Monda and Ron Meister, for the scholarship which I have benefited from in your discussions online as well as today about the settings. One point I'd like to make, I'm a journalist, English language journalist in Sri Lanka. And also I love history and archaeology. It was my mom who introduced me to Hornblower. I'm essentially a Hornblower fan, not so much a Chandler Forrester fan, although I have read some of the other books as well. I haven't read this War of 1812. For me, of course, what really captivates me is his meticulous attention to detail. Absolutely. It brings to life warfare, sailing ships, and the geographical settings. Somehow I did not, I'm a lover of maps, and before these electronic maps came in, I'm a lover of maps and travel myself. Somehow I did not see the lack of maps because of his textual description of what's going on, the angles of fire, the approaches into different bays, the force of the winds and how they have to tack from here to there and go around this island and that island. It was his descriptions were so detailed that I somehow the point you made, Ron Meister, is good, but I somehow didn't really feel the lack. I love the Hornblower Companion. I'm also very grateful to the British. That is where I read his books. I read Hornblower series about 4 or 5 times right through. I started as a 14-year-old, and I must thank the British Council for enabling me to do that because these books are not available here in Sri Lanka at all. So I must thank all of you guys for your hospitality in doing that. And I'm afraid economics does not allow me to attend meetings, but I will certainly look forward now that I've mastered the technology and thank you, Mary, for connecting me. I will look forward to future participation. And of course, I thank Ludwig, who actually came down to Sri Lanka and we met physically. So thank you all you guys, and Nicholas G also for his work in editorial work. John Roberts also. Thank you so much. I'd like to feel being part of the society. I'm fascinated. Of course, I'm very sad that all of us I'm 70 years old, in fact, I'm just recovering from a heart attack. I'm sad that the younger generation somehow are not tricking with Forrester and his meticulous historiography, his sociological detail. I'm sad about that we are all part of older generations. But anyway, that's life. Thank you so much, Greg.
Lucky, you are most welcome, and it is so good for us to have heard your voice over the years to see you. We wish you good health, and we hope we will see you again soon. Adrian, your hand is up. Is that from before, or is that a new comment?
Just a comment. I think. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm sure Forrester mentions the thicker wood of the hulls of the American boats, the ships, in the book. But I just want to tell an apocryphal story about an Englishman and an American who met, and the American said, over 200 years ago, you burned Washington. And the Englishman said, oh dear, I'm terribly sorry. I thought he died in his bed. Sorry.
Yes. You should apologize for that. Well, perhaps that on that note of burning an American president is an appropriate conclusion for our meeting. I say again how wonderful this is. We have had a book of the year for as long as I know the society. We have never had a discussion comparable to this one. We have never had a gathering of so many interesting people with intriguing, thoughtful things to say, and it is a great pleasure. John Roberts, did you want to do any summing up for us, or shall we?
Only thank you, Ron, just to thank you and all participants, and to say that if there are any loose ends, and there probably are one or two, we could pick these up at our annual meeting at the end of September. Plymouth is a great place to go. A lot of the American Canadian tourists, when we were down there last week, and we stood on Devil's Point and looked up the Hamoaze. Anybody who's read Ship of the Line will know the first 5 chapters are in Plymouth, and Sutherland navigates down the Hamoaze towards Devil's Point. And on the top, on Devil's Point, is a space there where if anybody wants to read the book or a chapter from the book or do any reenactment, it's absolutely perfect space on Edge Hill. So we will be circulating very soon the program. John is very kindly crunching the numbers and working out what it's going to cost. Prices have been going up, certainly in the UK over the last 2 years. But John's doing a good job, and I promise that very, very soon we will send out the program. It's quite a packed program. There's an awful lot to see down there, and we haven't been there before. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you all. What a wonderful day. Thank you for all your contributions. We hope we will see you again soon, either in person or virtually. Bye-bye.